Alright, ladies and gentle girls, guess what's going on? As you guys know, I cover so many phones on this channel, and sometimes it's good just to kind of take a step back. That lately, the news, the media, they've been publishing all these sorts of things about the iPhone XS, the XS Max, and I've fell victim to it too. I've done so many videos on it, but it kind of took me away from my root cause of even starting this YouTube channel, and that's pretty much looking at the older devices. And when it comes to the later part of 2017 or 2018, it's kind of hard to go and like get new phones and like make a 2018 review or still worth it video or whatever, just because we're so close to 2019 that there's really no point in doing that. But it's kind of interesting to take a look at a phone that we've already done a review on this year, but also kind of do an updated review and see whether it's still worth it or whether it's not. I mean, a lot of things have changed since this phone, since I did that first video on it. We've seen not only the betas of iOS 12 come out, but the official version so far. We've got the new iPhones. We've got a budget iPhone, iPhone XR coming out in like not even like a month from now. So let's just kind of see how this phone holds up in 2018, the later part of 2018, when this phone is already on iOS 12. So before we kind of go delve into those specific details, let's kind of go over some of the body real quick. I'm sure you guys already know this is the same body we've seen with the iPhone 6 and the 7 and the 8, but there's a little bit differentiating factor between the 7 and the 8. Those will have a little bit more of an updated body. This one is more of the same one from before, but the reason I like this body so much is that we're able to get the rose gold color. But looking at the front, this phone has the 4.7-inch IPS panel. It's 750p, so it's a little bit higher res than 720p, but still not as sharp as 1080p. It's really not that big of a deal for me. I know a lot of people are going to complain about it, but you're paying for a phone that's panels isn't that good, so you kind of have to remember that. But the bottom has the speaker, the charging port, the back has the rose gold color in my specific model, but you are able to get the space gray and the silver. But I really like this rose gold one. I wish they made a rose gold with a black on the front. That would have been epic, but they didn't do it, but whatever. And in the back, we have a single camera, which I will get into in a second. But that is pretty much the whole entire body. And the cool thing is that this phone does support Force Touch, which is something the iPhone XR does not have. This phone was actually the first one to originate it, and I use Force Touch all the time. I like it a lot. It's a little bit more intuitive than just a long press, but I still like the 3D Touch Force Touch over just long pressing something. Now, kind of looking and taking a step back, this phone started off getting iOS 9, which was actually not that bad of an iOS version, and neither was iOS 10 for that matter. But when iOS 11 hit, that's when everything kind of fell into shambles, and that's including when I did that first review on it earlier this year. I did it on iOS 11, and now things have totally changed. I mean, this phone is now getting iOS 12. It's already on iOS 12. And I've done a lot of videos on it, and I think it's a very worthwhile update. It made things for sure 100% more stable. I still think there are some funny things with it that kind of rub me the wrong way, but I think as a whole, iOS 12 is definitely a big improvement. And I think going with older phones like the iPhone 6s, even the iPhone 6, I definitely saw improvements in speed, which is a very, very cool thing, because this phone I was only expecting it to make it more stable, but they actually made it a little bit more speedier as well. And you can see I've done comparisons if you want to step back on the channel, but also try to put some on the screen of comparing it from iOS 11.4.1 to iOS 12. And you can see that there is a humongous difference in terms of the speed. And in almost every single test, I've seen that. But the only downside is that the multi-core score did go down a little bit, but it's really not that big of a deal. In terms of the overall update though, the score is still over 100,000, so it's not that big of a deal. And I shouldn't put too much pressure on it, because really the real world performance is what we're looking at. The apps opening, this and that. And I don't think that multi-core score can really judge that fairly based off of what I saw, because that number was wrong. It should have been higher, but that's just my opinion. But in terms of the software updates itself, this phone is, I think, only going to get one more version of iOS, so it's going to stop at iOS 13. I don't really see it going beyond iOS 13 just because it's supposed to end. It's supposed to get 4 or 5 versions of iOS. The iPhone 6 is definitely not getting iOS 13. I think the iPhone 6s is stopping at iOS 13 and stopping there. I don't see it going any further, but technically speaking, you still have all of iOS 12. We have so many more updates in that, and we have all those updates in iOS 13 as well. So another 2 full years, which is still very, very good. And this all kind of goes down to the performance, how this phone performs on the certain operating system that it's on. Now, this phone does have the Apple A9 chip, which isn't horrible at all. It has a dual-core 1.84 gigahertz processor CPU and 2 gigabytes of RAM. And this was actually the first iPhone, this and the 6S Plus were the first iPhones to have 2 gigabytes of RAM. And this was such a worthwhile S series upgrade. A lot of people say, oh, S series are supposed to be minimal, this and that, but this could have easily been the iPhone 7. This phone brought more than the iPhone 7 brought, in my opinion. And that in and of itself is a reason this phone is still a banger. In terms of the performance, the 2 GB of RAM really brought into what it could have been. Like I said, going from iOS 11 to iOS 12 was a humongous upgrade. And even going from an iPhone 6 to an iPhone 6S was a humongous upgrade as well. And it's cool because 2 GB of RAM is, in my opinion, sufficient enough for an iOS device. If you think about it, the iPhone 8, which was just released last year, also had 2 GB of RAM. I know the CPU was a little bit clocked higher and this and that newer chip, but the RAM is also a very important aspect of it too. And I will say 100% fact that the 2 GB of RAM really hold this phone down. In terms of the performance, in terms of pretty much everything I've had, I've been perfectly fine with the performance. And I've actually done a comparison not only between the iPhone 6S and the iPhone 10, but also with the iPhone 6S and the iPhone 10s as well, in terms of the raw opening speeds and everything of it opening apps and this and that. And yes, the iPhone 10s is faster, but the iPhone 6s is not that much slower. It's not like 300,000 times slower or anything like that. And you can still easily hold on to an iPhone 6. And I still think the iPhone 6s is a very strong competitor in terms of the performance. Now, sometimes it might glitch up here and there and it might heat up a little bit, but that's kind of a given when it comes down to a device like this. I mean, the newer apps and games are more supported and more kind of bent towards the newer devices, the iPhone 10s, the 10s Max, that both have 4 GB of RAM. And a lot of people are going to say, well, it doesn't matter so much about the RAM, it matters more about the chipset, like the Apple A12 Bionic or whatever that it has. But in my opinion, I think the 2 GB of RAM, I could talk about it for years, but that's just my opinion. And I think if you're playing games, or you're really doing really intensive games, or even light games or multitasking between apps, your performance is going to be very, very good no matter which way you look at it. And that is the way I've seen it so far. So I would really recommend it if you're in the middle or you're scared about the performance or something. Don't really worry about it. That's not one thing to be worried about this specific phone. There are other things to be worried about this phone other than just the performance. Now, going a little bit further, let's just talk about the camera for a second. The camera isn't horrible, okay? It's not bad at all. It's 12 megapixels. You can shoot 4K videos at 30 frames per second, and you can shoot 1080p videos at up to 120 frames per second as well. So I'll say that 100% the camera is still usable. It's not garbage. It's not like a potato or whatever. But what I will say is that you are kind of giving up some of the dual camera setup actions that the newer phones do have, such as portrait mode, portrait lighting, the cool zoom in effects, and all those little things that you do get with something like an iPhone 7 Plus. But for a lot of people, I don't think that's going to be like an upgrade factor, like a reason to upgrade to a phone like that, just because the cameras on these phones are so good that even the iPhone 6s, I'm one of those people, and I said this in another video, and this is the truest thing I ever said. I'm a type of person, you can give me an iPhone 6s and I'll be perfectly fine with it. As long as it shoots 4K, I think I'll be okay. Even all my videos are 1080p. If you give me something that's a little bit higher than 1080p, I'll be perfectly fine. And I think the iPhone 6s does a very good job using the camera that it does. And I'll say that 100% this camera is still good. I don't think it's the best ever, but I will definitely rate it like a 7 out of 10 maybe. You know, the iPhone 7's camera is probably like a 7.5 out of 10. The iPhone 7 Plus's camera is like 8 out of 10, 100%, just because of the dual cameras and all that stuff. But this camera is not that far off in my opinion. You also have a 5 megapixel front-facing camera. It can shoot 1080p at 30 frames per second. There's no Face ID or anything, so it's only one camera up there, but it's still not that bad at all. Now, moving forward, this topic is probably the one that's going to make or break you. In my opinion, I never found that the iPhone 6s had good battery life at all. I think it was definitely a decrease from the iPhone 6, even though Apple might have said it was better or whatever. I don't think so. It had a 15 milliamp hour battery, and this phone's battery life was okay at the very greatest, I would say. It's not that good at all. What was surprising though, if you want to know a fact, the iPhone that actually started off the whole Apple slowing down devices, this and that, was actually an iPhone 6s. And what happened was that when the battery degraded on the iPhone 6s, I'm guessing because it had such horrible battery life, the person found that when they replaced the battery through Apple, the score actually went up, the multi-core score, and the phone was way speedier. And I could totally see that happening. And it's so funny that was an iPhone 6s out of all the iPhones, because this probably had the worst battery life out of all the iPhones that were released since 2014. So the 6 Plus, 6S, 6S Plus, they decreased the battery size, but they made it more performance heavy. So I'm not too sure why they did that. They did the same thing with the iPhone 10s as well. So I don't know what they're going to do with that phone, but that is kind of my opinion, the way I look at that. Now, some other quick notable things to note. This phone, like I said, does have Touch ID. It actually has Touch ID too, so it does kind of have an advantage there. I always prefer Touch ID over even other fingerprint sensors, and I wish the new iPhones had fingerprint sensors, but they're not going to. But I really prefer that. And even though this phone does have a lot of bezel around it, there's somewhat kind of used to it. And at low-key, I kind of do miss the bezels just because it gave me something to grab onto. So there was that. This phone, like I said, came in several different colors. Another quick thing to note is that not only did it come in different colors, it also came in different storage sizes as well. So you're able to get 16 gigabytes, 32, 64, and 128 gigabyte variants. So depending on your usage, you could go get a 16 gigabyte iPhone 6s and not pay that much, versus if you want to have a little bit more storage, you can get a 128 gigabyte variant as well and pay a little bit more money, but that's kind of up to you. And I kind of like having that flexibility. If you don't use your phone that much, get a 64 or 16 for the base level. If you need a phone for your grandma or something, you can go get it for her. But this phone also kind of did have a little bit of water resistance. Apple never like marketed it as it, but from water tests and everything that people have stated, it did have a little bit of water resistance. Not that much, I wouldn't dump it in a pool, but it can handle a little bit. And so is the iPhone 6s worth it in the later part of 2018? I will say 150% yes. This phone is still completely worth it. Even though it has not that good battery life, I still think this phone is worth it. I think it's very, very good. I don't really see any problems with it except for the random shutdowns that the battery caused, but you can still go into the Apple store and fix it. But even if you have a little bit more money to spend, I would still almost recommend it like an iPhone 7 or 7 Plus, just because it will last you an extra year. Really, the only downside is this phone is only getting 2 more years of software updates, but I think this is one of those phones that you can use even after the software updates, just because iOS 12 is going to be really good. And if Apple stays on the same wave, I think iOS 13 is going to be really good as well. So you don't really have anything to worry about in that sense. But I will say, if you're in the market and you have a little bit more money to spend, definitely get an iPhone 7. There's really not too much wrong going with the iPhone 6s. It's a very safe phone. Parts for it are really cheap if you ever need to get anything fixed. The battery life is really the only problem. The camera's still good. Touch ID is still awesome. And another 2 years of software updates, dude, that's pretty good. That's all you really need, in my opinion. If you want to get an iPhone 6s or an iPhone 7, I always look for the lowest prices on Amazon. I link them directly in the description. So if you want to buy it, so you can get it for the lowest price and also help this channel grow at the same time. If you guys have any questions or anything, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit that like button, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber we get really does count. So it means so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, Lo-Fi Alpaca. Make sure you guys go subscribe to that. That is my baby right now. And I need to get 1,000. I'm literally like 50 subscribers away from 1,000. So if you guys could hit that, that'll mean so much. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out, everyone.